You're listening to Cinema Rex. It's an Iranian film podcast, episode 12, Samira Makhmalbaf's Blackboards. Hello, how are you, Farhan June?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing well.
You celebrated a monumental occasion recently.
Yep, my 20th birthday.
Congratulations.
I feel good about that.
Happy birthday, Kaveh.
Thanks for celebrating with me.
Of course.
Durud bar shoma dostan aziz. Welcome to the Cinema Rex podcast. I'm Kaveh Mohebi.
And I'm Kaveh Mohebi.
And we are two Kaveh Mohebis on a mission to teach Farhan Muradi about what?
His name. My real name is Farhan Muradi. I'm still learning this, though.
And about Iranian cinema and films and television and media and plumbing and dramatic arts and theater and craftsmanship.
Taxes.
Axes and juggling.
I said taxes.
Oh, taxes, of course. Taxes and axes.
Taxes and axes.
I have something really exciting to share with you.
Go ahead.
So for Christmas, my wonderful partner in crime and wife, Mariam.
I thought I was your partner in crime.
You're my partner in crime. She's my partner in crime and wife.
Okay, I got you.
She got me all 4 volumes of this book, A Social History of Iranian Cinema.
Oh, wow.
By Hamid Nafisi.
Nice.
And I've retroactively gone through some of the little tidbits from the films we've done in the past just to see if there was anything I could pull. Man, are these books filled with little wonderful tidbits that I'm going to be using from now on for our episodes because this was stuff I could not find on the internet.
Nice.
And really helpful. So one of them I wanted to do retroactively is drop a massive knowledge bomb on you on Kimyai's The Deer.
Hit me.
Specifically referencing a question that we both discussed. And I think it's fine that we didn't know the answer. This information is hard to come by, but it's good to have, our own interpretation, which we very much went on. And then literally from the horse's mouth, from the deer's mouth himself, an explanation as to why the title of the film is called The Deer.
Okay.
Do you remember what we'd said? You'd given an estimation that I thought was very good.
I think I had said because they're these like peaceful, regal creatures that are often hunted.
Yeah, and I like that. And I still think, it's art, so everyone's up to it. I thought it was a very nice interpretation. I'm going to read from this directly. Kimyai's The Deer was screened at the Tehran International Film Festival, in whose official publication, Kimyai explained the meaning of the film's enigmatic title. He remembers as a school child his teacher telling the class that deer have ugly legs, but beautiful horns, and that what saves them in a tight spot is their speed, thanks to their ugly, scrawny legs, while that which snares them is their long, pretty horns. The reverse is true of the film's main characters. 2 close friends with a vast potential for societal good fall victim to vice, one to heroin addiction, the other to robbery. What keeps them in the end from giving in totally to corruption is the innate innocence and purity, as well as their childhood friendship. Now, I don't know why that second half, I don't quite understand how that analogy is 1 for 1, but I do think this idea of like the ugly, scrawny legs being salvation and the beautiful horns being the thing that can ensnare you is actually somewhat quite apt to what some of these characters are going through. I thought it was a beautiful explanation, and it was directly in response, this Kimyai's response to why it's called The Deer.
That's really cool. I like that a lot.
Mm-hmm. So like moving forward, I'm going to always find some time to like look up the chapters. This is like 4 volumes, each at about 600 pages. So we have about 2,400 pages of notes to go through.
Yeah.
But it's been very helpful. So I'm going to just also thank my partner in crime and wife, Mariam, for this book.
Nice.
And if people have other book recommendations that they think is valuable, I've got another one called Close Up. That's a reference to the Kiarostami film that I'm reading through as well. It's called The Past, Present, and Future of Iranian Cinema. But yeah, if people have like book recommendations that are just full of really interesting facts, please let us know.
In the interest of retroactively adding a couple little tidbits, I'm going to add one for the title of the first podcast that we did.
Yes.
For the first film. Where's the Friend's House?
Mm-hmm.
So while obviously it's a line that's spoken in the film by the mother of the main character, a few people had messaged me and they were like, and it's funny because the people who had messaged me were non-Iranians who were cinephiles who were like, oh, it's a reference to this poem, which has a line in the poem about where's the Friend's House. But then a few other Iranians that I spoke with who are all much older, who are like 50s, 60s, 70s, were like, no, it's like, it's a saying. It's a thing. It's like a proverb of when you talk about something that's so sweet or it makes you feel at home or it makes you feel welcome, that is the Friend's House. And so sometimes there's like a call and response. It's like, where's the friend's house? It's that cozy winter day when you come in and it's warm and whatever. Like it's a saying.
Yeah.
So yeah, I just thought that was worth mentioning.
So please stop messaging Farhan with explanations as to
No, it's okay because the messages are kind of what led me on finding this out. Yeah, you know what we should do? Every episode, maybe we start with giving a couple tidbits about a couple of our episodes. Because I have a few more, but we can save them for later.
Sure. Correction corner.
Yeah, correction corner.
Today, Farhan, we are looking at the film Blackboards, also known as, I think it's called Takhte
Siyah or something? Takhte Siyah?
Takhte Siyah.
Takhte Siyah, yeah.
By Samira Makhmalbaf.
You know, when I was a child, from the very first years, I loved to be a director because of loving my father, because I find that he loves cinema, and I go through it to see what is cinema, and I find it as lovely as my father was. And I love making film more than being an actress. I think cinema can be the same as a mirror in front of a culture. Show it to itself and tell it what is wrong with you. Maybe at first they don't find, culture and people doesn't want to look at it. And they tell, okay, I prefer continue my own way. But if you, express on your idea and keep mirror in front of them, at first, at least, it can show them to themselves can change something.
A prolific filmmaker in her own right, but she's also, one of the things she's famous for is being the daughter of Hussein Makhmalbaf, who is also a famous legendary director. One thing I really kind of want to try to avoid from doing, and I don't know how you feel about this, is not talking too much about her father, because I want to speak about her as a director in her own sort of right and being in journey. There are some things that I think are interesting as behind the scenes and backstory about it.
Mm-hmm.
But what I would hopefully like to avoid is like making this like the Mohsen Makhmalbaf
Sure. Yeah.
podcast.
I mean, it's important to note Mohsen is a co-writer on this film.
Yeah. Yes. And those things, I just kind of feel like we'll get to a point where we're going to do his films anyways.
Yeah.
But the other thing I'm really excited about is this is our second female Iranian director we've done on the podcast. The first being Marzia Burumand, who was the co-director of City of Mice.
Mm.
But again, I was trying to for a long time, I've had a really hard time. I've spoken to a lot of my friends and family who are women filmmakers, or like one she's a critic. And I was kind of asking, it's really hard to parse out the Iranian filmmakers from yesteryear. Of course, there's a lot up and coming now. But I was reading the that book that I mentioned, and I just wanted to share you some stuff about Iranian filmmakers if you want to hear them. There's some interesting facts about women filmmakers in Iran.
Hit me.
Prior to the 1979 revolution, only 3 women were ever credited with directing feature movies. Shahla Riahi for Marjan in 1965, Marwa Nabili for The Sealed Soil in 1976, and a director named Kobra Saidi, who was also known as Shahzad. She was a cabaret singer and dancer.
Mm.
She directed a film called Maryam and Mani in 1979.
Oh, these are for feature films.
Feature films, yeah.
Okay.
But only 3 credited female directors. You could also include Furugh Farrokhzad, but her film was a documentary, and it was
a short film.
Documentary. But during the late 80s, female directors grew more numerous. The 9th Fajr International Film Festival in 1990 officially recognized their prominence by devoting a program to the cinema of female filmmakers. Feature directors were most visible, as the festival showcased films by Puran Derakhshande, Raskhshan, Banitimat, shoot, I'm going to butcher this, Feryal Behzad, Tahmine Milani, and even Marzia Burumand, City of Mice.
Tahmine from Prince of Persia?
Yeah, Tamina. Yeah, so essentially in 1990, the 9th Fajr Festival did a showcase of Iranian female filmmakers, and they had included City of Mice on that panel because of how prolific that film is.
Mm.
But it's somewhat ironic because, post-revolution, all of a sudden the world of cinema opened up to women in Iran, like Iranian filmmakers. But compared to the men, their numbers remained few. For one example, the official statistics that the Islamic Regime Public News Agency released for 1988 listed 1 woman as having directed a feature movie that year, 1 woman as a screenwriter, 2 as film editors, and 1 as dubbing director, and so on and so forth for smaller roles. Apparently, no female director of photography had worked on a film that year. So that's just one example, out of the year 1988. Those were the stats.
Mm.
By 1999, the same analysis of statistics showed that less than 6% of all directors were women, and that only 6 of the 120 producers were women. Women consisted 23% of all actors, 24% of set designers, and 10% of scriptwriters. So it's relatively modern. That's like as of the year 2000.
I wonder if percentage-wise, it's actually similar to what it was before the revolution. Because
You mean like you think even less now?
No, or like the same, just because I guess if you were to like average it out over the decade, because before the revolution, there was also much fewer directors working in general, because it was still a pretty new art form in Iran, relatively speaking, right? So when you consider like, 3 were women, and how many directors were there overall making movies in Iran? I don't know.
But that's from a timeline of like 1900 till 1979, though.
Yeah.
That's like the entire history of Iranian cinema before 1979.
Let's say, for example, 3 women out of 100 directors then. And then since the revolution, there's probably been another 100 just by the nature of how the film industry works, right? Like that there's access to more equipment, things become cheaper. I wonder. I don't actually know.
Well, it's fine. It's a discussion. I don't know either. But I just think it's interesting because I think we've both had this discussion, but I've been particularly like having anxiety about trying to find a good balance. I was worried about getting to like 20 episodes and it being 20 consecutive male directors. And I'm thankful that we've so far found ways to incorporate films that have female directors, but it's tough. Like it's genuinely tough because I don't want to have too many repeats either. But you look at the history of 100 years of Iranian cinema and it's like, I don't know. It's just, it's difficult. It's a difficult thing to parse out.
Can I try my hand at summarizing this?
Yes.
I think the film industry, like a lot of industries, has been largely dominated by men for so long in Iran and in many countries. And Iran is obviously a fairly patriarchal society, especially after the revolution. So I think we need to keep that context in mind when we're talking about, well, how many female directors are working in Iran versus how many male directors are working in Iran.
And have worked.
And have worked in the past. Yeah. So for us, I think we're going to do our best efforts to try to have as many female directors showcased on the podcast as possible. And we thankfully have come up with a pretty solid list. A big issue why we haven't done as many yet is actually because so many of those movies are such seminal parts of cinema, and we're actually working on getting specific guest hosts or interviews paired with those episodes. That's why those ones are harder for us to just bang out on a whim.
Yeah.
So those episodes are coming for our listeners. Those episodes are coming. And some of them are about films that were made in Iran. Some are about Iranian filmmakers in the diaspora. Those episodes are coming.
And it's not to say that it's clearly easier to find Iranian filmmakers, women Iranian filmmakers in the modern era. You could easily say like Shada was directed by Noura Niyasari. A Girl Walks Alone at Night is Anna Diliamanpour. Persepolis is Majran Satrapi. But those are all pretty modern films compared to the long history of Iranian cinema. And I think a big part of what we wanted to do was like dig deep into like some of the classic films that were the foundation of filmmaking today in Iran. So when you're looking at films from the 50s, 60s, and 70s, and then the stat tells you that in about an 80-year history of Iranian films, there was 3 credited female directors, it's tough. It makes it really difficult.
It's also interesting that a lot of these movies that we've reviewed on the podcast so far only feature 1 or 2 women in the movies.
Yeah.
Like it's almost a reflection of the world that a lot of these directors live in, right? Because a lot of times, like if you're a filmmaker, a lot of your friends are filmmakers, right?
Yeah.
Or they're producers or they're actors, whatever the case is. And if you're talking about an industry that's largely dominated by men, it would come to reason that your films will reflect that reality. So even the film that we're talking about today, there's only 1 female character in the entire film, even though it's directed by a woman.
And there's about 50, 60 people in the film, maybe? Would you say like
probably more? Like there's tons of characters in this movie and there's only a single woman.
Yeah.
Her whole like character is that she's a mom. Like that's what it boils down to. So I think that that's also a reflection of the reality that some of these filmmakers are living in or were living in, especially like 25 years ago. But thankfully, it does seem like it's changing. I don't know how much it's changing within Iran, but it's definitely changing.
With that, should I just dive into plot summary?
Yeah. Yeah.
Plot summary for Samira Makhmalbaf's Blackboards. Wayfaring Kurdish teachers carrying blackboards on their backs look for students in the hills and villages of Kurdistan, near the Iraqi-Iranian border during the Iran-Iraq War. Saeed falls in with a group of old men looking for their bombed-out village. He offers to guide them and takes as his wife Halabja, the clan's lone woman, a widow with a young son. Riboire attaches himself to a dozen preteen boys weighed down by contraband they carry across the border. Saeed and Riboire try to teach as their potential students keep walking. Danger is close. Armed soldiers patrol the skies, the roads, and the border. Is there a role for a teacher? Is there hope? It has a 74% Rotten Tomato score and a 76% audience score. Farhan, beginning with you, what did you think of Blackboards?
I liked it for the most part. I thought some of the editing was kind of weird. But that stood out to me just because I come from a background of editing.
Like weird how? What do you mean?
When it cut between angles, like between the sides, sometimes there'd be like weird pauses. It almost felt like it would cut to the other angle and the actor was like waiting for their cue to say their line.
Oh, right. Okay. Yeah.
And it happened a lot. So like you'd be watching a conversation and then someone would say something and it would cut to the other side and there'd be a pause and then they would jump in and be like, no, hold on. And it's like, that guy hasn't said anything for like 3 seconds. What do you mean? Hold on. Like,
Yeah.
And there was a lot of repetition in the dialogue. And I think, again, I don't think it felt natural. Like it wasn't a natural repetition thing.
Mm-hmm.
It felt more like the line was said once on the other person's angle. And then it was said again when we cut back to the other side, the same line.
Yeah.
So it actually felt unnatural to me and it took me out of the movie.
Yeah, okay.
The general premise of the film, I loved. And I loved how innovative they were with the use of the blackboard.
Yeah.
There's certain plot lines that aren't neatly tied up, and I actually really like that because it feels more realistic.
Yeah.
For example, at the beginning of the movie, there's a group of teachers, right? I don't know if there's like 5, 6, 7 teachers, and they're all walking together. All of them have a blackboard strapped to their back.
Mm-hmm.
They kind of look like turtles almost. So they're like walking through the mountain, and you hear helicopters passing over by the first time, and they run for cover. After that, when the sound leaves, they kind of get out from by the mountains and they start smearing clay on the backs of the chalkboards so that it'll help them camouflage better as they're walking. And then they get to a fork in the road and the majority of the group decide to go one way, but 2 of them say, actually, I think it's way safer if we go this way.
Can I just stop you there? For context, too, it's good to know that we are in the midst of the Iran-Iraq War.
Yes.
So we know that we're in the 80s.
Yes. And that's the clue that it gives you.
The helicopters.
Yeah, right away, they're speaking Kurdish, right?
Yep.
They're in the mountains. They reference the border, and then you hear the helicopters and they run.
Yes.
So right away, it's like, by these clues, they're telling the audience, hey, this is the Iran-Iraq War, which I thought was brilliant. I thought that was a really good way to show the audience when this is, as opposed to like a title card or whatever.
Yeah. Well, and also, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but for the uninitiated, Kurdistan is like, it's not a sovereign nation, but it's made of a group of citizens that the Kurdistan, there's Iran Kurdistan and Iraq Kurdistan, correct?
Yeah.
There's Kurdistan villages that are sort of on both sides of the border.
Yeah.
So that you could be Kurdish and living in Iraq and Kurdish and living in Iran. But yeah, so essentially they are not a sovereign nation, but they are a people who live in villages that exist in both those 2 countries.
Yeah. And
so the fact that these 2 countries are warring with each other is incredibly inconvenient for the people who live on 2 sides of the border.
Yeah. I just thought that narratively, it was a clever way to quickly convey to the audience where we are and when we are.
Mm-hmm.
And so when the group splits up, I think 4 or 5 of them go one way.
Yeah.
And then the other 2 go the other way. We follow the 2. We don't follow the 5. We don't follow the bigger group.
Yeah.
My thinking was the movie was going to cut back and forth between the large group and the small group.
Yeah.
But that's not what happens. Because then this group of 2 also splits up and we just follow each of them. So we're only following
Saeed and Riboire.
Yeah. But we don't follow the bigger group. And you never find out what happens to that other group. They never mention it.
Yeah.
There's never a line of dialogue that's like, oh, that other place is been ransacked or is depleted, or oh, that's where everyone is safely. Like, they never mention it, and I actually really like that.
Yeah.
There was also a lot of really sweet moments throughout the film, given that it's a backdrop of displacement and refugees and war. You would think that it might be super depressing from beginning to end, but there are moments that are actually kind of funny, and some of the circumstances are really interesting. And so, to give you an example of a couple of those moments, one of the two men joins a group of children.
Reboir.
And then the other one, Saeed, he joins a group of adults.
Old men, actually, old men specifically.
Mostly old men, yeah.
Yeah. They're like, for the most part, they're like generally old men.
Yeah.
I think there's a deliberate contrast there of like young kids and people towards the later stages of them.
I think the inference is that the middle-aged men are likely fighting.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is why they're not there.
Yeah.
There's a scene where Saeed is like, hey, do you guys want to learn? And they're like, no, leave us alone. And he's like, no, come on, like, I'll do it. I don't even need a lot of money. Just give me food. They're like, we don't have food. They're like, well, do you have bread? They're like, no, we don't have bread. Tell you what, I'll help you get to the border if you give me some food. They're like, fine, we'll give you 40 walnuts. He's like, 40? That's not enough. I need 50. And it's like, bro, 10 walnuts are really going to make a difference to you.
Yeah. I mean, it speaks to how, there's a note I made for myself. I'll just bring it in now. Is this the poorest people we've seen in film yet so far of our entire CRP podcast? I think these are some of the poorest people we've seen in terms of, like, these are poorer than, you compare this to Where's the Friend's House? And those people are obviously relatively poor to us. But compared to these guys, they have homes, they have a marketplace, they have clothes on their back, they have a backyard, you know, they have a water, they're watering flower. Like, these people have literally nothing. They have the thing on their backs, whatever they're carrying, and that's it. And that's the true for the kids too. What did you think? Like, do you like, can you like give an example of anyone else in the, like, of main characters that are poorer than this?
Dastan from Prince of Persia. All he has is the blunt dagger.
All he has is his smug charm and his Jake Gyllenhaal beauty.
And his Persian prideful walk.
Yeah. One thing
I think you're right. I think you're right.
The other thing was, as you're mentioning, like, I really found it funny how when Rebois, before he meets up with the boys, he's kind of going to this small village area, and he's kind of like calling out education as if he's a guy selling apples.
Yeah.
So instead of being like, apples, fresh apples, he's like, multiplication table. Who wants to learn their multiplication table? 2 times 2 is 4.
And it's like, and it kind of reminds me of, like, you know, in those Western films when a criminal enters town and then all of a sudden everyone's like, and they're running into their houses and they're like shutting the windows. It's like this wholesome teacher coming in town and he's like, who wants to learn? And they're all running inside and shutting the windows. Shooing their children inside.
But it's just funny because all they have is their only commodity to share to society is I have this ability to teach you and educate you. And think of how, looking at it from outside, how valuable that is. But these people are so focused on the brink of survival for today that the prospect of learning, like, how to spell your name isn't that important to them today. Because they're like, how am I going to transfer this thing I'm smuggling for, like, enough walnuts to have a meal or bread? You know, it's just like speaks to their level of destitute.
Yeah. Well, especially when at the beginning, when it's the big group of teachers all traveling at the very beginning of the movie, they're all traveling and they're like, oh, what's your plan? And one of them says, oh, we didn't have a doctor in our town. We had to keep going to the town next door. So I'm going to find a student and teach him to become a doctor so that we have a doctor in our town. It's like, this is the way that they're thinking about things, that he thinks, I'm going to come into this town and trade this child so that one day he can become a doctor. And this child is like, dude, I can't think of, like, 25 years from now. There's a war going on. I need to do what I can to survive right now. Oh, and the funny little tidbit that they find out later, that all these kids actually already know
all
how
of them
to
or some of them. Because the one kid does, like, Rebois, he meets a kid that has the same name as him, and he teaches him how to spell his name.
Yeah. He was the only one,
most
I think,
of them
that doesn't
do. I
know.
remember the kid said most.
Yeah, because the other kid said, no, we all know how to read. And then he's like, what? Like, why did you tell me? And then he's like, well, because all of our moms told us not to trust strangers.
Which is the value, like, that's the level of things they need to educate each other on, is just like immediate danger awareness, right? I found the film oddly poetic. like the things that fascinated me most were the elements that this felt more like a documentary, even though it isn't. There was such a documentary feel to this, even for Iranian cinematic standards. And part of it was because I didn't think they did very good character development for a lot of the characters. And I think the thing that pushes this from being an interesting, valuable, good film in my eyes, but not a great film, is that stuff of like the writing, which I will put on Mohsen Makhmalbaf, not Samira. Mohsen Makhmalbaf, the writer, is that everything about the setup and the world and this journey is so fascinating. But the writing, it almost felt like there was an experimentation to it. There was let these characters be. Because also, aside from the woman played by Behnaz Jafari, she's literally the only actor. Everyone else is an extra from that village. They're all Kurdish. The other actor who plays Rebar is Bahman Qobadi, who's actually a Kurdish director himself. He's an Iranian Kurdish director, but he's not an actor. The only professionally trained actor is the woman in the film. So there is a lot of like, this is us documenting real people on a journey. Maybe the journey isn't real, but no one's acting. You know what I mean? In that same Kiarostami style. They let the language of the cinema kind of speak for itself. There's stuff like the opening shot, you mentioned they're all carrying the Blackboards. And that's really interesting way into the world. And then they hear the helicopter overhead and the way they do the turtle thing of like ducking under. They're using the Blackboards on their back as like protection, the shield from like whatever bombing might happen.
It's their shelter.
Yeah, they all huddle together so the Blackboard forms like a rooftop over all of them. And I like that. At the same time, I was like, is that a bit on the nose in terms of symbolism? Like the education that they're carrying on their backs is the thing that protects them.
Well,
or am I reading that?
Let's dive into it during deeper analysis. Because
Yeah.
I have some stuff I want to talk about with the Blackboard.
But I overall did like the film. I would not push this into like loved it territory.
Yeah.
But I think it's like a very, and again, this is one of those films I find, I got to be careful about who I recommend it to. I can't recommend this to a lot of casual film goers. You have to be invested in watching something that almost feels like, I'd almost rather recommend this film as a documentary to people.
Yeah, and I
Does that
think
make sense?
I think one of the reasons why it feels so much like a documentary is because of the way it's edited.
Yeah.
Because a lot of times in documentaries, the pacing and the editing feels kind of weird and disjointed because you're doing the best you can in post. You're kind of recreating everything in post, right?
Yeah.
So you're actually quite limited with what you can do. In this case, I bet you like, what's the running time of this? It's an hour and 20 minutes.
Yeah, about that.
I bet you I could cut this down to an hour and I think you'd watch it and be like, I don't know what's missing, but it feels better. And I think a big part of that is just because some of the editing feels a little clunky. I also wanted to mention that I think the reveal at the end could have been done in a much more impactful way.
Which specific reveal is that?
When they finally reach the town that they're trying to get to, and there's just mustard gas everywhere and and cyanide and stuff, I think that could have been done in a much more impactful way. So have you seen the movie The Dirties?
No, but the Canadian film, right?
Yeah.
I haven't seen it.
So the whole movie touches on these kids who are getting bullied at school.
Yeah.
They're kind of neurodivergent, the kids, off in their own little world, and they're planning for something and you don't exactly know what's going on. And then at the end of the movie, you realize that it's a school shooting. So the movie ends with this school shooting. Yeah. When that happens, when you're watching the movie, that's what really makes that movie so impactful, is the way that that's handled and the way that it's done. Because the whole movie, it's like, oh, this is their life. This is what's going on, all this stuff. And then all of a sudden, it hits you with this traumatic event. It's not super gruesome or anything, but it rides that line of showing you, hey, this is a massacre without doing it distastefully. And I think because it does it so well, the movie has a lasting effect on you. And when those credits roll on that film, you feel horrified, but horrified in the way that you want to feel horrified. And I think that with this movie, I think there was a way to potentially lean into it a little bit more, still without making it gratuitous and still treating it with reverence, but in a way where maybe the film might have been a little more impactful.
Okay, I have a question for you though. Was the thing that happened in the end the massacre though, or was the massacre not the thing that they referenced earlier? Because the woman references, I don't want to go back. Like, I'm scared about going to the border. They think that they think they're being bombed or something. She references the massacre that happened in the town. And I didn't know if that was a past event or if that's an upcoming event. I assumed it was a past event.
I suspect it's a past event as well, but I think that it's one of those things where they get there and it's still there. It's still happening. Like, I don't think it was a case of like, oh, we're just going to drop these chemical weapons and leave. So it's possible that this could be the remnants of it and the latter half of it. You know what I mean? Because as they're getting closer and closer, you can hear it. Even though the one character's like, it's not chemical weapons, don't worry. You hear it hissing and you hear it spreading and you hear it dropping.
Okay, yeah.
And it gets cloudier and cloudier, and it's not fog.
I thought it was fog.
I think in reality it's fog, like in the shooting, but I think it's supposed to be the chemical weapons.
Okay, interesting.
See, that's why I mean, like, I feel like they should have leaned into it a little bit more. Like, imagine that scene where they're all crawling up the mountain and they're coughing and they're in pain and they're crying. Yeah. If all of a sudden they start just passing out right there on the mountain.
Yeah, yeah. Because again, it's a thing of like, when he says we're at the borders and they don't trust them, there's a whole element of like, are they telling the truth? Like, I didn't know whether or not to believe him either.
I believed him.
Interesting. Because
I think for me, that whole exchange of this isn't our homeland, you lied to us, right? I think that hits so much harder if it is their home and it's been destroyed, because now it's not your home anymore in some ways, right? Because then the conversation becomes, well, what is your home? Is your home not a place where you're safe, right? Is your home the rolling hills, the mountains, the beautiful sky, all this stuff? And so when you take away the sky, the mountains have been flattened. The air is no longer pure. You're no longer safe here. It's not your home anymore. Yeah. So although they're speaking in a literal sense of they think that he's bamboozled them and taken them somewhere, I think to me it's more of a symbolic thing of this isn't our home anymore. Our home's been destroyed. Yeah. Because eventually they're like, oh wait, no, he's right, and then they cross the border and they start kissing the ground. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I think also to me it would have been more impactful if, as they're crawling up the peak and they start coughing, if a few of them started passing out and then they get to the top, the ones who are like surviving and like barely able to talk through the coughing are like, you lied to us. This isn't our home. This isn't. If the movie just kind of ended there, I think it would have hit me a lot harder. And usually I actually like when there's a little bit more of a denouement. But on this movie, I think it would have hit so much harder if they hit that peak and they're like, this isn't our home. You lied to us, and the movie ends. When one of them meets the old man earlier on, I think it's Said, and he asks if there's a teacher in town. The old man who's shoveling sand. Remember, he's just shoveling sand. You can't even see his face. Yeah. He asks him to read a letter for him. He's like, "You're a teacher?" He goes, "Yes." He goes, "Read this letter for me." He says to him he can't read Arabic at first. He's like, "I can't read this. It's in Arabic." But then like the guy's like, "You can't read it for me," and he starts fiddling with the paper, and then he quote unquote reads the letter and says, "It's your son." He sends his hellos to brother and sister and all this stuff. And he's like, "Is he out of jail?" And he's like, "Oh no, he's not." I was wondering if there's an element like, did you suspect he's making it up? I think he is a little bit. I think he's doing his best to try to make sense of this letter that's probably made up of like Arabic and Kurdish, like interchangeably. And he's like trying to figure it out. But he's also trying to like get out of this conversation now with this old man, but also not make this old man worry. That's what makes you think that maybe he's lying at the peak. Yeah, it's just like, is he, is his main goal right now to make sure he can lead them to, I don't know. It was like, if he was being dishonest at that moment, then it could be a little tip off that he's not being entirely honest either. Because Saeed is the one who also marries the woman, and of the two leads, he's sort of like the less, I'll help you, but what will I get out of it? Whereas I know they're both looking for, but the other guy who is this, he's like offered food, and he says, no, you keep it. Yeah. And the kid insists, yeah, you're right. I don't know. Because I think it's up for interpretation. I don't think it is, because 10 seconds after they have that argument, they all realize that it is their home, and they start kissing the ground. I think it's hard for them to recognize it in the moment because there is so much smoke and gas everywhere. And at first, I was like, oh wait, is he lying? Is he telling the truth? I thought about the symbolism behind that exchange, which made me realize, oh, maybe this is more of a commentary on how your home can be destroyed.
Yeah.
Right? And what is your home? And then 10 seconds later, when they pass through the gas and they recognize their home, they start kissing the earth and they continue to walk through the border. And then he turns back. And you even like see the borderline, like you see the barbed wire. So for me, I think it becomes clear, which is more weight to why I think the movie should have ended a little bit earlier, because I think it's actually a little more interesting for this movie to have an open ending.
Mm-hmm.
Because then you can have this conversation of, did he lie? Did he tell the truth? All this stuff. See, sometimes I like open endings and I prefer them. This is a case where I would have preferred the open ending.
Yes, you're very unsure of yourself and who you are as a tastemaker.
Yeah.
What did you think of the marriage scene? I thought it was one of the most interesting marriage scenes caught in film. It's unlike anything else I've ever seen in a film. It's just like, do you want to, because, Said joins the group and then it's like, oh, she's a widow or she got a kid. And he's like, I'll marry her. I don't know why he decides he's going to marry her, but it's like as flimsy of a marriage proposal and wedding as whatever. And then the group elder sort of puts the blackboard between them so they can't look at each other. And she's like, do you agree to marry him? And he's like, huh? The woman's kind of just saying, they're like, I don't, okay. And he's like, okay, do you want to marry her? Yes. All right, you're both, what will you give us, dowry? And he's like, my blackboard.
Yeah.
And she's like, all right. And there's like the marriage ceremony's over and they're like, you're officially married. And they just go back there like, it's just such a like.
And there's a play on words too, where, ha works as both yes and as what.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So a bunch of times she uses it to mean one, but the guy interprets it as the other. And she realizes this, so she starts to flip it on him.
Mm-hmm.
And so she's like, you want me to marry the blackboard? And like she like flips it back on him. And then she's like, okay, I'll marry the blackboard, like all this stuff.
Yeah.
So then throughout the movie, she calls him Blackboard.
Yeah, she calls him Blackboard. It's the title she gives him.
Yeah.
Which says, because she's clearly not like in love with him. She's not into the marriage at all. She only sees him as like his occupation. You're the teacher.
Yeah.
Like as a means of making money, but he can't even really do that. So it's just like, and there's essentially an attempt at consummating the marriage too, right? When he goes into their hut and sort of like kicks the kid out for a second.
I think he presents it as if it's an attempt to consummate the marriage.
Yeah.
To the villagers so that they'll like leave him alone.
But then he's just teaching.
But his whole play is to just try to teach her.
Yeah.
And I think the reason he does it, like he's not even interested in marrying her until he finds out that she's the daughter of the like leader of the group.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So I think he clocks the fact that nobody wants to learn from me, but maybe if I can teach the leader of the group, right?
Right. Yeah,
then I can get everybody else to follow along, which is why he immediately was like, I'll marry her. Mm-hmm. And then when he goes to quote unquote consummate the marriage, when it cuts back, it's, oh no, he's just teaching her. And throughout the trip, he just keeps trying to teach her things. And then finally, when he goes to abandon her, he's like, fine, you don't want to learn? I'm going to leave then. And then she goes and she hits him with that banger of a line.
I like this idea that these characters in their country's time of need during wartime, their attempt at saving their countries through education. Yeah. That is what they have to offer their people. Yeah. And they're like, it's like, they're not soldiers, they're not fighters, they're not warriors, they're teachers. Mm-hmm. And they're like, our country is in need. And what our country needs more than anything is educated people. Mm-hmm. So they're soldiering up to go do this mission, which is to save people through teaching.
I especially love that you have these Kurdish men who are likely from some Kurdish village who went into the city, got their education, became teachers, and decided to go back to Kurdish villages and find people to teach. Because they're like, this is your way out. This is your way to do more than just this. You know what I mean? Yeah. My mom was a teacher in Iran. She went and she studied. She became a teacher. Then she went and started teaching in little villages in Mazandaran.
She should watch this. Have you seen this?
I don't think she has.
Probably like it.
Probably. I know she like Where's the Friend's House. And Where's the Friend's House, the teacher in that movie is likely from a city as well, just based on his accent. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I really like you said, it feels like their own crusade, their own journey, their own mission to be like, okay, now that we've done this as a group, let's all go and find these villages and teach these kids. Because a lot of people who would leave the villages and who would go and learn to become teachers in the cities, they opted to just continue to work in cities. Mm-hmm. My mom was telling me that when her and her friend were like, no, we're going to go teach in in the small villages, all their classmates were like, why? Why would you do that? That's so weird.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
I also think in some ways it sometimes when you have do you remember as a kid, you would get a substitute teacher come in, and sometimes the class would test that teacher.
Yeah, of course.
To be like, okay, what can we get away with this teacher, right? And I think that there's a little bit of trial by fire that teachers need to go through when they're dealing with a new group.
Yeah, of course.
The test of character for Saeed is where he's going through trying to negotiate for walnuts, trying to marry the daughter of the leader of the village. And then for the other teacher, his test is really a test of patience with these kids who are just constantly busting his chops and pushing his buttons, right?
Yeah.
And I love that he keeps flip-flopping between being like, oh, my dear student, hello, young man, all this stuff. And then he switches to, God damn it, why aren't you guys listening? Like, he loses it.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's like, bro, if you're going to lose your temper this quickly, good luck as a teacher.
There's a recurring motif of the need to piss throughout this story. And it was these moments and even the divorce scene or the wedding scene where I'm like, I'm pretty sure Samira Makhmalbaf's intentionally trying to be very funny. But I couldn't tell the deeper analysis. You remember there's the old man who cannot piss. Mm-hmm. He can't urinate. He's got a blocked whatever, prostate or urethra, whatever. Then there's a little boy that she has to take him out to try. There's this constant recurring need of the need to piss and urinate. And I'm like, this is deliberately trying to be funny, but they keep bringing it back. Do you think there's anything to that? Did you have any take on that at all? Because I don't have a take on it. I just made a note of it.
The only thing I could think of, I kind of noted it, but not really, was just that the need to go to the washroom and having a hard time doing it, I think was just a way to tie in the fact that whether she's taking care of this child or taking care of her father, it's the same issue.
Right.
I think it's just a way of tying in the elderly and the children in that they are dependents.
There's a few times, though, when the two men, 2 or 3 men also help the old man take a piss in the corner. He's like, you can let it go. Just let it out. Just pee. And they're holding him up near the water. It takes a village to help him piss.
Yeah. I don't know. I'm going to be completely honest with you. I didn't see any symbolism on
Neither
the
did
pee representing
I
life or this or that. But what I did see was more she has 2 men in her life, right? One is her son and one is her father.
Yeah.
And both of them struggle with the same thing. I think it's more of a representation of the fact that she has to provide for both of them.
Yeah. I mean, you could have done a lot of things, though. It could have been they both refuse to eat walnuts, or they both want to drink water, or they both...
Sure. You can ask Samira Makhmalbaf. Also, if people listening to this think Kava is reading into pee way too much, feel free to hit him up.
Smash that P button. Behind the scenes in trivia. Just want to do a quick little background on Samira Makhmalbaf, because I think it's very interesting. So this is really behind the scenes. Samira Makhmalbaf was born in February 15th, 1980. It's almost actually her birthday. She's the daughter of prolific Iranian director Mohsen Makhmalbaf. He's the writer and director of famous Iranian films, The Cyclist, Kandahar, Kabeh. But this is not about him. Not quite. Samira acted in many of her father's movies from her childhood on. In fact, the Makhmalbaf Film House, established in 1996, constitutes of a family production house and film school in which the entire family, his second wife, Marzia Meshkini, Hana, who was then 8 years old, and Samira, then 17, were taught filmmaking and made their own movies. They worked on each other's films at various capacities and eventually distributed the resulting works. According to the Makhmalbaf Film House, according to its website, Makhmalbaf began the film school to teach Samira, who dropped out of high school to learn to make films from her father. Considering Iranian universities were inadequate, he conceived a plan to open a formal film school and hold a nationwide entrance examination to accept 100 students. When the Ministry of Education denied his application, he opened a small home school in his house with his 8 family members and friends. During the time, many film exercises were conducted and several professional films were made and released, which made a name for the directors. Mohsen directed Silence, Meshkini directed The Day I Became a Woman, Samira directed The Apple at 17 years old, and Blackboard at 20. This film was made in this family film school. Maysam, who's Mohsin's son, directed a documentary about the making of this film called How Samira Made the Blackboard, which is impossible to find. I searched up and down for this documentary. Could not find it. And Hana made the short video The Day My Aunt Was Ill. روزی که خالم مریض بود. The MFH, Makhmalbaf Film House, acted as a film school, a film production house, and as a film distributor. So Samira essentially dropped out of high school at 14 years old and studied under her father how to make films. And Blackboard was the second film she made in this family, 8 members only film school.
It's funny how she dropped out of school, and then in this movie, it's like,
well, yeah,
it's important that you go to school.
Well, I think there's actually something I'd read. This is sort of a response to also her teachers, I think. Whether or not she disagreed with their attempted practices, or maybe she had a problem. I mean, again, don't forget, she grew up in the Islamic education system, right?
Mm-hmm.
So maybe this is a little bit of a sticking her thumb at those teachers who were teaching under Islamic rule, right?
Mm-hmm.
The Maysam, her brother's documentary, How Samira Made the Blackboard, contains home videos and film footage of his sister's career, demonstrating how Samira developed from a child actor in her father's movies to a 17-year-old director.
Who's older between Maysam and Samira?
I think Maysam is older. I have to double check that. Famous Iranian Kurdish director Bahman Qobadi played one of the teachers, Vribar. And actress Behnaz Jafari played the one woman in the village. But the rest were non-actors. They were Kurdish locals. Bahman Qobadi.
We've talked about him in a previous podcast episode.
Which one?
I don't remember, but we talked about reviewing one of his films.
Bahman Qobadi, who played Ribar in his own right, is a Kurdish Iranian filmmaker who spent his career pushing the boundaries for Kurdish existence in Iranian film, declaring openly his passion for Kurdish peoples, subjects, and histories. He has been assistant to Kiarostami on The Wind Will Carry Us, which was partly filmed in Iranian Kurdistan. Actually, we're doing back-to-back films that take place in Kurdish villages, eh?
Yeah, you're right.
His own film, Qobadi's own film about Kurds, is the celebrated feature A Time for Drunken Horses. Farhan, you have some behind-the-scenes and trivia stuff regarding some of the context of the film?
Yeah. After the fall of the Ottomans at the end of World War I, a series of wars were waged between the Iraqi government and Kurdish peoples, which resulted in the death of hundreds of thousands of people. The use of excessive force by the Iraqi Central Authority against the Kurdish population, and the massacre of tens of thousands of Kurdish civilians through bombings, artillery, and the use of chemical weapons. In addition to these casualties, millions of Kurds were displaced and turned refugees. Already a people with a history of displacement at the hands of a Persian majority in Iran, the Arab conquest, and the Ottoman Empire, the Kurdish people have faced a millennium of oppression. Following the Iranian Revolution, Kurds in Iran have also faced violence at the hands of the IRGC and the Iranian army. During the Iran-Iraq War, Kurdish groups PUK and KDP rebelled against Saddam Hussein to establish an independent Kurdish state. This was from 1983 through 1988, culminating in the Halabja massacre, where the Iraqi forces used chemical weapons, including mustard gas, against their own civilian population. It is estimated up to 5,000 people were killed and over 10,000 were injured. The Halabja massacre was later concluded to be a genocidal massacre against Kurdish people under Saddam Hussein. It is estimated up to 5,000 people were killed and over 10,000 were injured. The Halabja attack was later concluded to be a genocidal massacre against Kurdish people under Saddam Hussein by the Supreme Iraqi Criminal Tribunal, and the attack has been condemned by governments around the world. The town had been subjected to a 5-hour attack involving conventional and chemical weapons. Iraqi aircraft dropped chemical bombs on residential areas, causing widespread devastation. Eyewitnesses described seeing colored smoke and experienced terrifying symptoms such as vomiting and loss of consciousness. Survivors reported various forms of death, including sudden collapse, laughter followed by death, and slow, agonizing deaths from burning and blistering. The attack resulted in numerous casualties and injuries, with victims showing symptoms consistent with cyanide poisoning and exposure to mustard gas and nerve agents. Despite previous smaller-scale chemical attacks, the international community failed to respond effectively. Survivors, aided by Kurdish fighters and Iranians, hurriedly buried most of the dead in makeshift mass graves. After retaking the land, Iraq sent troops to study the effects of their weapons and attacks. after which the town, still littered with bodies, was systematically razed by Iraqi forces. So the town was essentially flattened. The Japanese government funded a $70 million project to provide safe drinking water in response to the devastation. Assistance in the development of chemical weapons came from the United States under Reagan's administration, West Germany, the Netherlands, the United Kingdom, and France, with raw materials also coming from Australia, Italy, and East Germany. So that being said, I don't think it's a surprise that so much of the world turned a blind eye to what was happening. I think it's also worth mentioning that the Iranian government likely used these Kurdish militia forces against Iraq. I don't think they actually cared about establishing an independent Kurdish state. Otherwise, they would have done it in Iran as well. They were 100% just using whatever they could to hit Saddam from as many angles as possible.
Yeah.
And I think that also is likely why so much of the fighting happened along the Kurdish portions of the border, is because neither the Iranian government nor the Iraqi government actually cared about the Kurdish people.
Yeah.
Which is unfortunate given the fact that Kurds have such a long history in Iran. And then you have the Iranian government not caring and using them as pawns.
So in the context of the film, you have one group of elder statesmen or elder villagers who have left their Iraqi side of the border to flee the bombing, right? To flee the poisonous gas.
Mm-hmm.
And now in the film, they're trying to return back because they think it's now safe passage, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Is that the context? And then for the kids, they mention at one point, they're like, the teacher says, "What are you guys doing?" He goes, "We're mules," meaning they're just drug mules. They're bringing over contraband across the border.
Is it drugs? Do we know that it's drugs?
I guess it could have been. I mean, from the stuff that I had read when I was doing research, everyone referenced it to the fact that they were like, it was contraband one way or another. They're smuggling the stuff across the border.
Yeah.
It's not being like shipped legally under the authority of
right. But
shipping
my
bodies.
question is it contraband in the sense that these are supplies going to Kurdish people? And
perhaps
the Iraqi government doesn't want that to happen. So it could even be medication. It could be weapons.
You're right.
It could be food.
Right.
Like, we don't know what it is.
You're right. It's contraband, blanket statement.
Yeah.
And it's technically doesn't really matter. It's just the fact that these kids have been tasked with this is the only thing they can do to provide some sort of financial means, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, dark stuff. And this is the context in which Samira was like, this is the story in the world I want to tell, which is, I don't know, some of the most moving things about it. Critical reactions. It won the jury prize at the Cannes Film Festival in 2000, and it was a nominee for the Palme d'Or.
Why didn't it win?
You have to ask the jury. Do you think it's Palme d'Or worthy of winner, or is it fine to be just a nominee?
I guess it's fine to be just a nominee. I don't know what else was nominated that year.
In her speech for the jury prize, she said, "This prize is to honor the heroic efforts of all the younger generations who are struggling for democracy and a better life in Iran."
Wow. Was she allowed back in Iran after this?
I would assume so.
This might have been during the reformist movement in Iran, though, where the government was pretending
you're right. Yes,
to
2000.
Yeah.
Yes. It was the 2000 Grand Jury Prize winner, also at the American Film Institute Festival, AFI Fest. Critic Jonathan Rosenbaum of the Chicago Reader, who we've brought up before, he really likes Iranian cinema. He's an avid Kiarostami fan. He'd love this podcast, actually.
We should send it to him.
In general, he spoke highly of the film, adding, "When I first saw Blackboards 3 years ago, I was surprised as well as puzzled that in some way it reminded me of John Ford's 1950s Western Wagon Master."
Have you seen that?
No, but it reminded him of a Western.
That's interesting.
This film. And the last little bit I have for critical reactions, I definitely want to hear your thoughts on this. Critics of Hussein Makhmalbaf and his family, especially the critics coming from those in political exiles, have with some justification pointed to political connections as the reason for the success of the Makhmalbaf Film House and its members. Referring to Samira's Cannes entry in 2003, the exiled film critic Basir Nasibi cynically states, and quote, "Without benefiting from such government connections, it would have been impossible for such a young girl, even if endowed with talent and high capability, to achieve 1% of her status and success. Iranian cinema is dynastic. Morusi is the word, I guess, in Farsi. Morusi?
I don't know. I don't know the word.
I see that in brackets. Iranian cinema is dynastic and the lucrative situations are divided amongst the favorites." End quote. How do you feel about that thought?
I mean, like I've never worked in the film industry in Iran, but from the Iranian filmmakers that I've spoken to who have worked in Iran, that sounds pretty consistent. But the irony there is the people that I've spoken with are also people who've made movies in Iran. So a lot of what I hear is people being like, oh yeah, the only way that you can get movies made in Iran is if you're in with those guys, like in with the government. Sure. But then they'll follow up being like, except for my movie. So it's like, well, then clearly there's exceptions to the rule where there's people who are trying to make things. Yeah. And they're brushing up against the censorship. And sometimes people make things secretly, like
Panay.
Yeah.
It's funny because it's like with Nasibi, this film critic, Basir Nasibi, it seems like a little bit of sour grapes because he's an exiled film critic. But at the same time, you could argue he's not wrong. Samira is a very talented director in her own right, but how could you deny that to some degree nepotism plays a part of it? Yeah. And to another degree, if Samira Makhmalbaf wasn't as famous as he was, maybe Samira might not be getting a lot of the passes that she's getting around that time with that government specifically. So it's like, yes, sour grapes on Nasibi, but maybe he has a point. I feel like there's a bit of jealousy amongst those exiled film critics too, because they're like, these people are like dedicating their lives to an art and have to have fled their home country. So
yeah. Contextually also, this was a time period where the Iranian government was pretending to be open to the idea of some progression. Yeah. Before cracking down like immediately after again. That's also a potential factor here, is that it's possible that the government was more lenient with her because of the climate, but I have no idea. And I think the reality is that we'll never know about some of this stuff, even if the regime changes in Iran. Like I think a lot of filmmakers who were tight with the government are going to turn around and be like, no, I was never tight with the government. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah.
So these are things that we can only suspect. I know we've provided mixed feelings on Farhadi. Farhadi has also been accused of being tight with the government, but he's also someone who has criticized the government. He just does it like way later than everybody else. Like once the ship has already sailed, everyone, like all the other working filmmakers in Iran have criticized, then he does it. Yeah. So some people look at that to be like, oh, clearly he's in with the government. But then recently he just came out and he said that he's not going to make any more movies in Iran until the hijab restrictions are removed. I mean, it's tough to say when these filmmakers are associated with the government and when they're not. I think for us, it's important to look at the themes that they're trying to push with these films and the impact that it'll actually have on Iranians and on our culture internationally, and judge the film based on that, as opposed to just blanketly being like, oh, this person is in bed with or is not in bed with the Iranian government.
Well said, Far.
Oh, thanks.
And that's all I have for critical reactions. Okay, let's move on to deeper analysis.
Hava, what have you got?
The children are smugglers. The old men are returning to their homeland after the Halabja gas attack, returning to die, because, they're all older, too. I feel like they want to return to their homeland. And these teachers have blackboards strapped on their back, which, what does it resemble? Long, black wings. You said turtles. It also could be like your shield. But it's also like they all kind of look like birds or angels. I don't know whether it's like you want
angels of death, maybe
angels of death or angels coming for salvation. Is it education?
We also see the crows multiple times throughout the film.
Will education set you free? They negotiate themselves every step of the way. Their presence is felt. So I don't know. It's just the little bit, maybe perhaps they don't know, but this idea of like the blackboard on their backs looking like long black wings. Mm-hmm. Angels or crows, the blackboards on their back being shielding them from war, the thing that will save you. It kind of came back to a lot of the same symbolism behind the power, strength, levity of education. Mm-hmm. What about you?
Yeah, basically the same. And I like that the representation of the blackboard changed multiple times throughout the film. Mm-hmm. Obviously, it's used as a tool for learning and a tool for education, right? Mm-hmm. And that's the first introduction we get to the blackboard, is that's what it is. That's who these people are. That's what they're doing.
Yeah. He literally is called Blackboard by his wife, too. Like, he is the blackboard.
Yeah. So first, it's represented as this tool for education. Then it's used as shelter when they use it to take shelter from the passing helicopters. Then it's used as camouflage when they paint it with the clay.
Yeah.
So that while they're walking, it'll be hard for them to be seen. And then it's used as a stretcher.
Mm-hmm.
It's used as a means to help someone who's sick.
Yeah.
They flip it upside down and they put the
Old man
the
who
body
can't
of
piss.
the old man, Kafka's favorite character, on the stretcher, and they carry him. And then it's used as a wall for privacy,
Yeah.
right? It's more intimate. It's a stand-in for intimacy. Later, it's used as a drying rack.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
And then it's cut up and used as a splint for a leg.
Mm-hmm.
And then finally, at the end of the film, it's used as cover from the bullet fire.
Yeah. He uses it specifically to protect his wife and child, the metaphorical stand-ins for his
stepson.
family. And one thing I wondered was, like, would it even protect them? Is the protection merely symbolic?
Yeah. So I think that that blackboard and the title is kind of a reflection of many things throughout the film about shelter, camouflage, and survival, and blending in, hiding. The stretcher and the splint kind of stand in for health.
So is it maybe, like, even digging deeper, is that then saying the shape-shifting quality of education, of how it's a multi-tool? It's like a Swiss Army knife?
I think so.
Education
Like,
can
honestly,
become everything.
honestly, I think so. I think that that's the point. I think that the point is that education can be a shelter. Education can be used to camouflage you when you need it. It can be used to provide health and wellness and medicine.
Yeah.
It can be used as a tool
To carry you.
It can be used for intimacy and to express love. He's literally teaching her the word love on it.
Yeah.
Once he's established the blackboard as a tool for privacy, right?
Yeah. How sweet is that moment when they get their divorce through essentially a ceremony that is exactly like their wedding. Yeah. And because a part of the dowry was to give the blackboard, she ends up walking away with the blackboard. But the last thing you see as she walks away is he's written on the blackboard, I love you.
Yeah.
So it's the final message as she's walking away to him. It's like, without her even saying it, it's like, that's a very beautiful image. I think it's one of those big standouts. I also really like this idea of, in this short journey between Said and this woman, Halale, we see the poetic lifespan of her meet cute. Man meets woman, marries her. They raise a kid together. They live in a house. They have a house together. They go through hardships and dysfunction and then ultimately divorce. Technically, all those beats are there. Remember, they even have a fight about the kid.
One day.
Yeah, exactly. All in one day. But, like, you literally see, like, when the kid runs away, remember at one point, and they have like a lovers, that's how parents argue. That's how a husband and wife argue. Like, they have a lovers spat. Mm-hmm. It's very funny. It's just like this, like, small, like, lifespan of a man meets woman, falls in love, gets married is encapsulated in this, which I thought was very funny. Yeah, this is great. I feel like we had very similar stuff for deeper analysis.
What's your favorite scene?
Best scene. Ultimately, I would have to say the best scene is Halale walking away with the blackboard. I just think, like, the culmination of their entire marriage and everything you saw, and him trying to teach her to write I love you, and she's ignoring it. And even though she never learned to write it, it's still sort of like the final message she's left with as she's walking away from him. I thought it was a beautiful image and scene. So I'd give that best scene for me.
It sounds to me like you couldn't think of a best scene. So at the end of the movie, you're like, I guess this last shot is the best scene.
Yeah, it's probably true. I don't know. Did you have a best scene?
I have two runner-ups and I have a best scene. In third place, it is the scene where they're crawling through the mustard gas. Mm-hmm. And the reason it's not my favorite is
also known as fog.
Also known as fog.
Yeah.
I just think that it could have been done a little better. It could have been more impactful, a little more clear. It was just a missed opportunity, so it falls to third place. Second place scene for me is when the townspeople think that the teacher and Halale are consummating their marriage. They try to distract the kid with this game where they're flicking walnuts back and forth and trying to, like, knock walnuts off each other's hands. Yeah. And everyone's getting so into it. There's a crowd of people that have huddled around these two older men and this child, and they're flicking walnuts. I thought it was really cute. But my number one scene was when Riboire and the boys, they're walking, and then all of a sudden the scout, one of the boys goes, they're coming, they're shooting. And then the boys all start running for cover, and the teacher's running with them. And as they're running, the teacher starts going, Arlek Riboir, Arlek Riboir. And then the kid starts repeating it, Arlek Riboir,
Yeah,
Arlek
that is a
Riboir.
great
And then,
scene, yeah.
and then they're like running up the mountain, and the teacher goes, "Rrrr," and then the kid goes, "Rrrr," and they just he keeps getting him to practice his letters while they're running.
Running
and like
for their
all
lives.
the other kids are like running for their lives, like, oh my God. They're like
Yeah.
running up the mountain, and he's still just giving this kid his lesson while they're running up. That was my favorite scene.
I have a new favorite scene. I thought about it. I hadn't written it down. I just remembered now.
Sure.
I do want to say the marriage ceremony is my favorite scene. Because the idea of like, this is a marriage ceremony you've never seen in any film before. It's the poorest of poor. It's over within 45 seconds. They're divided between a blackboard. It's so unique and such a charming little scene of, it's just like, here we go. These two are married. They met like literally a minute ago, but this is the way society works. It's just, it's interesting.
Also, context for the listeners. Essentially what happens is this teacher is tagging along with this group, and he's like, does anyone have water? Does anyone have food? Can someone give me something? And then this woman shows up with her child and gives water to this old man. And then she walks away, and then he's like, can I have water? Can I have water? And she ignores him. Then he goes up to somebody else in the group, and he's like, how come I can't have water? And they're like, oh, you can't talk to her. She's the daughter of the elder in the village.
Yeah.
And he's like, well, who is she?
Yeah.
He's like, you can't talk to her unless you marry her. And he's like, well, can I marry her? And he's like, you want to marry her? And then he's like, yeah. And he's like, okay, well, we need to get consent from the dad, which is the old man, which they, I guess, assume consent from the dad, from him, because he's like old and flailing around.
Yeah.
And then we have to go ask her. He's like, so let's quickly go ask her if you want to marry her. So then they go over to her, and she's squatted down and helping her kid who's crying.
Yeah.
And then as he goes up to her, the man's like, no, you can't look at her yet unless you get married. So then he puts up the blackboard as a barrier, and he goes, hey, you want to marry this woman? And he's like, yep. He's like, will you protect her? And he's like, yep. And then he asks the woman, he's like, hey, do you want to marry this guy? And she's like, what? It's like, the guy with the blackboard? Do I want to marry the blackboard? It's like, the guy. Yeah. She's like, you want me to marry the blackboard? Sure. And then he's like, okay, so you want to marry the guy with the blackboard? She's like, yeah, the blackboard? Sure.
Yeah. It's love, man. That's what love's all about.
They've literally never spoken. She doesn't even know what's happening. She's like tying her kid's shoe. Yeah. And all of a sudden they're like, hey, you want to marry this guy? I now pronounce you husband and wife.
Yeah. By the way, Rebor dies in the end, right? He got shot.
I don't know. I was thinking about that. I don't think we know what happens to Rebor.
You just see a bullet fire, and then like the blackboard falls under and his hand is underneath, but you don't see much more.
But I don't even know if that's his hand. We see the blackboard
I couldn't tell.
fall.
I looked at it. I couldn't tell.
I think the implication is that he gets killed and all the kids get killed.
Yeah. You see the kids getting sniped one by one.
One of them does.
One or two, I thought. A couple.
I think one does, but yeah. And see, like, that's another thing to me that even that could have been slightly more clear. I don't need it to be gratuitous. It's just slightly more clear. And I think it actually would have hit so much harder if it was.
Yeah. Least favorite scene. Mine was just, I had a hard time choosing, but I think that when he's debating for payment for leading to the border, not when he's talking about the walnuts, that's kind of a charming scene. But I felt like not knowing who this character is yet, and he's seen a group of older men who are clearly like steadfast on a mission, and now he's sort of banded with them and following them and now negotiating. I was like, God, you're so annoying already. Like this guy. And then that whole scene, I was just like, where am I supposed to, that was like my least favorite scene just because he annoyed me in that scene. It was quite early on in the film and he hadn't endeared me yet to him. So that's what I would give my least favorite scene. You?
For me, it was the first real conversation between Saeed and Halale. Just because there was so much repetition there, and that was one of the scenes where the editing really felt clunky to me.
Oh, okay. Where was that? Where was that? Was it in the house?
I can't remember.
Damn, that's poetry. I have a feeling we have the same one, but maybe we don't. Why don't you give me yours first?
Should I give you my my runner-up first?
Yeah.
My runner-up is an exchange between Rebor and one of the kids when he goes, wait, you can read? And he says, yes. And he responds, you told me you couldn't. And he said, I just don't trust strangers.
Yeah.
My mother told me not to. And what about the other boys? They can too. Their mothers told them not to trust strangers either.
بالله يهز
سوادتس؟
بله
مگه وقتا ندودت سوادم نیه
او با غریبه اعتمادم نیه
بوچه؟
خدایکم بموته
امرو قلت چه چه سوادی یانس؟
او انا خیلی کیان سواد یانس اما دایکشان پیشان وته که با غریبه که اعتمادی کیان نبود.
Yeah, it's a great scene.
But my number one is after Saeed keeps trying to get Halala to talk to him. After Halala has gone and chased down her son who chased after a bunny. And she just doesn't respond to him the whole time. He keeps trying to get her to engage in this math lesson and she won't do it. She's not interested. He tries to get her to learn how to read and write and learn to say I love you and she won't do it. He's like, okay, well, at least tell me you don't love me, and she won't say anything. So he gets up and he's like, fine, then I'm leaving. And he just leaves. And she chases him down. She's like, wait, Blackboard, wait. And then so he turns around and he looks at her, and then she comes over to him and she stops and stares and goes, my heart is like a train that never stops. At every station, someone gets on and someone gets off. But there is someone who always remains. And she leans in close and she goes, my son.
دلی من واگنی قطاری که 1001 وسکای هیلر وسکای نفرک سوار دبی نفرک دادبسی بل کسک هیلاغت دانبسی اویش اویننه خورم.
And then she grabs her stuff off the blackboard and walks away.
Yeah, it's a great moment.
Yeah.
That was mine.
Nice.
Favorite performance? I like Bahman Qobadi a lot, who played Rebar. Between the two male leads, he was my favorite character. I thought he was like a little bit more charming and fun, and I liked his interplay with the kids a lot. And so, yeah, it gave me very much. I liked his performance a lot too, and it just you can kind of tell if the other actor is the non-actor, and Bahman Qobadi is not an actor but he's a director. I felt like there was something about his knowledge in and around a film set that kind of really lifted his performance.
Yeah, I agree, and I think when he was trying to be sweet and gentle, he did it really well. And when he lost his temper, that was also done really well.
Mm-hmm.
So I would give it to him as well. But also the child with the same name, he was also very good.
What did you think? Like, I guess neither of us really liked. It wasn't our favorite role for the woman, right? Halala. Like, we didn't really. She was so like not a character for a lot of it.
There wasn't much to her. As an actor, I thought she was great with what she was given. She did a great job.
Yeah.
I was actually a little disappointed because I felt like, especially because a lot of Kurdish women in those situations are actually militant.
Yeah.
That I was a little surprised that she wasn't. I thought for sure they were going to be like, oh, she's the protector of the group.
Yeah.
But they didn't do that. So I was a little disappointed.
Yeah, that would have been cool.
Yeah.
Nitpicks, hot takes, what aged poorly.
That.
Yeah, the character specifically, Halala being underwritten, I thought again, it's all up for interpretation, but is the idea of like Blackboard being subtext for education and the Blackboard being the shield, and like, is that a little bit on the nose?
I don't think so. I think it's fine. I think it works. My other nitpick, I guess, would be some of the editing. Yeah,
I'd say like in a weird way, for a feature film that is a narrative film, the structure is a little bit flimsy. The pacing is a little bit documentary style, which with documentaries, you're quite often working with what you have. You're filming what you can. But this is like everything's narrative. You were in control of everything with the pacing. That's it. That's a nitpick. Nothing really there.
You don't have that nitpick with a lot of Kiarostami films, though. You tend to give him a pass.
I think maybe their characters are more compelling. All like a lot more well-rounded, compelling characters. So I'm invested in them, even if they're doing less.
That's fair.
Like, I can't even, like, outside Halala, who I don't think has much of a character arc, I don't know. I can't distinguish any of the other men who were on this journey, the Kurdish men, the older men, the elders. Like, who were they? They were just an amorphous blob of men, right?
Right.
No character stood out.
Right.
Double feature lineup. I said The Wind Will Carry Us because it's the landscape of Kurdish villagers. And I know it's literally the last film we both watched recently, but I kept thinking about it. You could do like a Kurdish village double lineup, or if you want to do Kurdish cinema night, a double feature lineup, you could do Bahman Qobadi's A Time for Drunken Horses. He's a Kurdish filmmaker. The log line is young Iranian Kurdish siblings try to save the youngest of them who is seriously ill. So again, you could have this. Bahman Qobadi's the actor in Blackboards, and he's the director of the film. So there's your double feature lineup. Far and you?
I have two possibilities. One of them is City of Mice, because you're following a teacher who's walking through the mountains with a group of kids, and they've been displaced by the cat, and the cat could be a stand-in for war. Meanwhile, there's a second group that's also escaping, which is a group of adults. In City of Mice, we don't see that second group, but it is pretty similar in that regard. So I think that you could have a lot of interesting discussions around the two sides of it, even though the movie wasn't as mature as I'd hoped it was, especially the ending. That being said, that brings me to my second double feature lineup suggestion, which would be to pair this with The Dirties. Because The Dirties is an example of a film where the ending hits you really hard. And because it does, I think it can lead to some interesting conversations in the audience about, well, how could we have changed the ending of this other film to be more like that? Did it need to be? Was that way actually more reverent and more respectful of the actual massacre? So I think either one of those two would definitely work.
You have to think like your City of Mice one's very good. It's almost oddly similar. And I was just thinking about it. Like if Samira was born in 1980, there's no way she didn't grow up with that film and living in Iran.
Yeah.
So you have to wonder that how much even subconsciously this might have had an influence on her.
Yeah. And also growing up with the Iran-Iraq war happening.
Yeah.
Right.
Exactly. Can this be a modern Hollywood remake?
What do you think, Kabe?
I don't think so. I think it's too much of a staple of its time and place. But I would wonder, I often think of I bring up the Wes Anderson thing, but when the kid said, "We are mules, we never stop moving," it actually strangely gave me an image in that moment of Spirited Away. And I wondered if a Miyazaki version of this would like literally go into Studio Ghibli, make it like anime. The kids who are mules, let them be mules. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
A fantastical element of this. If I heard there was like an anime adaptation of this film, I could totally see it. And I think it'd be very interesting in that way, in that Spirited Away.
That's interesting.
You think that'd be kind of cool?
Yeah, 100%. I don't trust Hollywood to adapt something like this. I think it's possible. Here's how I would pitch it. I would be like, hey, we're going to do a modern take on this film. And we're going to put our money behind a Palestinian filmmaker. And we're going to get them to talk about the struggles of their people.
Yeah, they're going to do that any day now.
Another side of this is if you were to do a modern Iranian take on this, I would love to see someone explore similar struggles that the Baluchi people go through. Because I'm sure they exist, but I haven't seen or heard of many Iranian films that show the Baluchi backdrop. And I wonder if part of that reason is because of colorism, but I have no idea.
Yeah.
Because I know a lot of Baluchi stories and what happens in Baluchistan in general isn't talked about as much in Iran.
There was that one actor who was Baluchi who he passed away in the 80s. I think it's John Baluchi. John
Baluchi. My God.
I wonder now though, is John Belushi's last name, is he like an offshoot of that? Baluchi. Final thoughts and grades. For a grade, I would give it a B, which I think is in the mid-range of 75-ish. I think some parts of the film are masterfully done. I think it's a very poetic film. The documentary aspects of it are very interesting. And I don't think this is for lack of trying. I think that Samira made the film she wants to make. But for my personal preference and taste, I would have loved to have seen a little bit more character development because this isn't a documentary. Because she has at her disposal a prolific filmmaker like her father writing the script. Let's see some character development. You asked me why Kiarostami might get a pass. It's because I think when he creates a landscape of people, like even small villagers with small roles have like, there's something to me that's very three-dimensional. They feel like they exist outside the boundaries of the film. I didn't see that as much in this film, but I still very much enjoyed it and thought it perhaps has one of the best marriage ceremonies I've ever seen in film. So lots of charm, lots of entertaining elements to it, thought-provoking film, solid B.
Okay, great. I would agree with that. I also gave it a B. Overall, I thought it was a good movie that captured an important moment in history. Some of the editing felt a little clunky to me, and as a result, I actually caught myself being a little aggravated at times. There was an unrealistic amount of repetition in the dialogue, likely from cutting together the same line from both angles. Sometimes shots would have pauses where you could tell the actor was still waiting to deliver their next line, or they were waiting for the director to yell action. And I feel as though there was a way to hit the ending a lot harder than the director actually did. But even still, I think it worked out. So yeah, B, which means that our average grade for this film is a B.
Blackboards is a film against culture and for life. Culture here is personified by a band of jobless teachers, insurers of dead certainties, put out of work by brutal forces beyond their control. Life here parades itself in the form of a band of children trying to make a living, while a group of old men are in search of their death. Hovering between life and death, the two factual realities of the evident. The teachers are hopelessly unemployed, unable to persuade either the young or the old to learn how to read and write. Samira, the high school dropout, is getting back at the system, very knowingly stating that in the midst of any hardships, human beings have the propensity to seek their place in the world, no matter what the challenges. Farhan, thank you very much for all that you do.
Kaveh, thank you very much for everything that you do.
Oh, thank you. That's so nice of you. To our listeners, thank you for listening in. We should mention that we're also on Instagram and some social medias, or should we just cut this part out and not do this yet until we have more social
I
medias?
guess we could. We're at episode 12. Follow us on Instagram.
At Cinema Rex Podcast.
We will typically post clips of upcoming episodes. So if you are interested in watching an episode before we review it, we will typically announce what the next film will be on our Instagram.
Yes.
So look out for it there. It'll give you an opportunity to watch it.
Yes. And you can email us if you have any thoughts, comments, or suggestions for future movies at cinemarexpodcast@gmail.com. Thank you very much, Farhan. And to our listeners, Be'omid Didar.
Bye. Music for Cinema Rex was written and performed by Sohail Sadinejad.